Welcome to Midnight Rain Tales. The world sleeps, and the rain begins to whisper. In this quiet hour, stories drift through the night air, soft, chilling, unforgettable. Here, under the midnight sky, we share the tales the rain refuses to forget. Stay close and listen. The satellite guide, my supposed tether to the known, began its electronic stutter somewhere north on Interstate 8. Pixels bled, froze, then jolted awake, painting phantom routes across the glowing rectangle. 3 days dissolving in Olympia boardrooms had left me lead-limbed, the sole ambition remaining. Reach Astoria, reach home, before the witching hour tolled. Then the first true siren song, a synthesized contralto urging me off the main artery, onto County Road 19 via exit 113. The dashboard clock glowed 10:42 p.m., an hour alien to my usual passage. A familiar path abandoned. Why? My fingertip traced the insistent blue line on the screen, seeking logic. None offered. Take exit 113 to County Road 19, it reiterated, devoid of inflection, yet somehow final. The exit ramp loomed, a concrete tongue licking the edge of the interstate. Collision, construction. My spine screamed against the Volvo's leather. 4 hours had fused me to the seat. A shortcut, even a dubious one, whispered promises of relief. I yielded. The indicator blinked, a rhythmic orange eye signaling my deviation. County Road 19 unspooled like neglected asphalt ribbon through timberland thick as felt. The surface, scarred and ancient, bucked beneath the tires. My headlamps carved a tunnel through absolute black, finding only the ghost of a center line, fractured and faint. No sodium lamps bled orange here. No companion beams shared the solitude. My phone, nestled inert in its cradle, offered no competing map, its screen a void. Both hands remained clenched on the wheel, knuckles white. The forest crowded the tarmac, skeletal branches interlacing overhead, a canopy strangling the moon's weak phosphorescence. The navigator's display convulsed. The guiding blue vein vanished, then reappeared, charting a course utterly alien. Recalculating, the synthesized voice declared, "Prepare to turn right, 500 feet." I leaned toward the windshield, eyes straining, ahead where the voice directed. No intersection marked by signage, merely a raw track. A dirt wound bleeding into the impenetrable woods. Impossible, the word rasped in the car's sudden tomb-like quiet. My hand reached to silence the device, to impose my will. The screen died. Utter blackness. I tapped, prodded the power button. Futile gestures against dead glass. My speed bled away. The Volvo crawled along the narrow road, hemmed in by sheer drops into unseen ditches. Trees stood sentinel at the verge, forming a claustrophobic passage. Turning back required space, a driveway, an intersection. None presented itself. Then resurrection. The screen flared, bathing the cabin in an eerie azure glow. It displayed not a map, but an abstraction. My icon adrift in a sea of undifferentiated green, a void on the chart. No roads, no names, just the relentless blue line arrowing deeper into this cartographic wasteland. Maintain current course 2.7 miles, the voice instructed, now subtly altered, tinny. I jabbed at the home icon, tried pinching the screen to zoom. Inert, unresponsive. My gaze flickered to the trees lining the road. Motion, peripheral. A branch? My mind supplied the rational explanation, but the air hung utterly motionless, thick and heavy. The road coiled sharply left. As the Volvo swung through the bend, the headlamps sliced across a pallid flicker among the trunks. Tall, thin, gone before my eyes could resolve it. A clammy film slicked my palms on the steering wheel. The navigator spasmed again. Static snowstorm, then void, then the map reappeared. My icon plunged even deeper into the featureless green abyss. Immediate right turn 100 feet. The voice crackled, frayed now, like sound tearing at the edges. I defied it, flooring the accelerator. The engine surged, a defiant roar against the encroaching dread. 70, 80. Then the headlamps faltered, a momentary eclipse that tightened a knot in my gut. Normalcy returned to the dash gauges. A fleeting reassurance shattered when the lights dipped again, longer this time, the blackness outside seeming to lean in, pressing against the glass. Ahead, a shadow, dense and swift, scuttled across the beam's path, too low for a man, too fluid, its locomotion fundamentally wrong. My foot slammed the brake instinctively. The GPS screen erupted in frantic strobes, white, black, white, and the voice, now a garbled electronic shriek, cease forward motion, immediate. Too late. The engine note soured, RPMs plummeting despite the accelerator pinned to the floor. Momentum bled away. The Volvo drifted to a halt, dead center on the forsaken track. I twisted the key, a strained cranking, then silence. Again, nothing. Dashboard illumination sputtered, winked out one by one. Silence, absolute and profound, rushed into the vacuum, amplifying the frantic drumbeat in my ears. Only the GPS screen remained alight, no longer a map, but a cascade of cryptic glyphs and digits, scrolling at impossible speed, painting the interior with fugitive blue light. A flicker above. The courtesy light pulsed erratically, on, off, a mad Morse code. Then the map lights, the dashboard backlight, joining the chaotic rhythm, transforming the cabin into a disorienting strobe chamber. A dry, skittering sound whispered across the roof. Fingernails on paintwork. It traveled, deliberate, from rear to front, pausing directly overhead. Silence. Then a renewed scraping, insistent, forceful. The headliner dimpled inwards, a slow, sickening indentation. Something was testing the car's shell. My hand scrabbled for the phone. Lifeless. Power button, screen taps, nothing. The scratching migrated, now slithering down the driver's side pillar, reaching the window. A primal urge screamed, "Don't look," but my head swiveled, drawn by morbid gravity, pressed close to the glass, distorting. A face, elongated, bone white, inhuman, features lost in the strobing glare, save for twin voids where eyes should have been. A strangled cry tore from my throat. It vanished. Then a delicate tapping, erupting simultaneously from all directions. Roof, doors, trunk, hood, a rain of ghostly fingertips drumming on the metal shell. The Volvo shuddered. The interior lights accelerated their frantic pulse. Through the strobing windows, I glimpsed motion in the tree line. Sinuous shapes gliding between the black trunks. More faces materialized, plastered against the glass, pale masks leering in. The tapping escalated, a frantic polyrhythm swelling into a heavy, desperate pounding. The GPS screen cycled violently through primary colors: red, green, blue, white, a chromatic seizure. The garbled voice returned, shredded pixels of sound. "Evacuate! Evacuate vehicle!" Never. The word was a choked whisper. My trembling hand turned the key again. A pathetic cough from the engine, then silence. A violent impact slammed against the windshield, starring the glass directly in my line of sight. A web of fractures bloomed. Another blow, louder, the cracks spreading like ice under pressure. The pounding on the roof found a sickening rhythm. Thud, pause, thud. Heavy, deliberate, like a monstrous heartbeat. Each impact visibly deepened the dents above. My eyes darted to the rearview mirror. Empty back seat. A blink. It wasn't empty anymore. A presence coalesced there, a patch of profound blackness that seemed to absorb the frantic light. Dimensionless, yet swelling, writhing subtly. Before I could process, the GPS screen detonated. A shower of sparks, a rain of hot glass shards across the dashboard. The interior lights went berserk, strobing into a near-continuous, eye-searing flicker. The shadow in the back seat elongated tendrils of darkness reaching. A frigid exhalation, impossibly cold, ghosted across the nape of my neck. Panic detonated. I slammed the door latch, hurled my body outwards into the night. The impact with the ground drove the air from my lungs. I tumbled into the ditch, mouth filling with grit and decaying leaves, pain flaring in my shoulder. Scrabbling upright, fueled by pure terror, I ran, no backward glance. The Volvo, a beacon of strobing madness behind me, cast leaping, distorted shadows through the trees. Branches lashed my face like whips. Unseen roots clawed at my ankles. Behind, the shriek of tortured metal, my car being unmade, and other sounds woven through it. Guttural clicks, wet whistles, syllables that scraped against the ear, mocking language itself. I ran until fire filled my lungs, until the strobing horror of the car was swallowed by distance and trees, until the only sounds were the ragged tearing of my breath and the frantic drumming of my feet on soft earth. Then, abruptly, the trees fell away. A clearing, silvered by the weak moon. Silhouetted against the sky stood skeletal structures, an abandoned industrial complex, perhaps a mill ravaged by time. Windows gaped like vacant eyes. Rusted, corrugated metal bled stains down crumbling brick. The choice stark, the dubious shelter of decay, or the endless, watchful woods. The clicking susurrus, the alien whistles were gaining behind me. I bolted towards the nearest structure. A door sagged open on a single tortured hinge. I forced myself through the narrow gap into pitch blackness. The air hung thick with the scent of mold, damp earth, and something else. Metallic decay. Water plinked rhythmically somewhere deep within. My frantic steps echoed unnervingly on unseen concrete. I found a corner, pressing my back into the cold, abrasive brick, straining to control my breathing, listening. The sounds from the woods ceased. An unnerving, absolute quiet descended. Even the dripping water fell silent. Then a faint scrape. Overhead. On the roof. Followed by another, closer from within the walls. A dry, chitinous slithering. They were surrounding the building, infiltrating it. Suddenly, a vibration against my thigh. Impossible, the phone was dead. Yet I drew it out. The screen glowed, stark white text burning against a black field. Wrong turn. It flared brighter for an instant, illuminating the space around me, then died again. But in that momentary flash, I saw them, pouring through the broken windows like black fluid, detaching themselves from the walls, unfolding towards me with fingers like jointed twigs. Again, flight, through corridors choked with debris, stumbling up groaning metal stairwells, always ascending, driven by the sounds skittering just behind, beside, seemingly inside. The walls now, their movement defying geometry. I burst onto the flat roof. Moonlight revealed a desolate panorama, crumbling parapets, vacant window sockets staring from adjacent structures, a wasteland of urban decay stretching into darkness. No streetlights, no roads, no hint of the world I knew. Then the voice, not from any device, but seemingly woven into the night air itself, intimate and vast. You have arrived at your final destination. They emerged, oozing through the roof access hatch, pulling their impossible forms over the parapets, coalescing from the deepest shadows like nightmares given substance. I retreated, step by desperate step, until my heel met open air at the roof's precipice. 4 stories below lay a concrete graveyard. Ahead, the encroaching horrors. The choice wasn't a choice at all. I leaned back, embracing the fall. The crushing impact never registered. Instead, a gasp, eyes snapping open, familiar leather under my hands, the steady thrum of the Volvo's engine, Interstate 8 unfolding beneath my tires, the GPS display serene, charting my standard route to Astoria. Dashboard clock, 10:42 p.m. Up ahead, the green signage for exit 113 glowed under my headlamps, marking the turnoff for County Road 19. The navigator screen flickered just once. My foot remained welded to the accelerator. Exit 113 slid past, ignored. I drove without pause, the miles dissolving under a haze of adrenaline and disbelief, until the familiar damp air and lights of Astoria embraced the car, home. The offending GPS unit met its end in the nearest dumpster, a small, violent exorcism. Now I trace circuitous routes around that stretch of I-8. My eyes flick constantly to the rearview mirror, searching the mundane traffic for impossible shapes. Sleep offers little refuge. Phantom clicks and whistles sometimes invade the quiet hours, pulling me awake, heart pounding. Any flicker from a digital display, phone, tablet, another car's navigation, sends tremors through my hands. Because I remember the cartographic void, the things that crawl in the spaces between mapped points. They wait there still. The question haunts the quiet moments. Did I truly loop back? Or am I eternally plunging from that rooftop, caught in the last second before impact, destined to awaken again and again at 10:42 p.m., approaching the exit that leads nowhere? A truth I can never verify because that turn remains untaken. Some deviations offer no return. Some roads consume the traveler. The space on my dashboard where the navigator sat remains a dark, empty square, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Azure fire hammered the teak of the celestial tide's upper deck, yet an incongruous frost had taken root in my marrow, a chill the Caribbean blaze couldn't touch. 5 days adrift on this supposed sea of dreams, this escape chartered as the ultimate reward, and the only landscape occupying my mind was the void in the adjacent cabin. A knot of apprehension tightened relentlessly in my gut. Something was profoundly discordant aboard this vessel, and the chilling suspicion grew that I alone perceived the off-key melody. My name is Clara Hayes, 34 summers old, a data analyst whose circuits usually hummed with the rhythms of Seattle's tech sprawl. This voyage was meant to be the grand exhale after sealing a monumental project. 7 sun-drenched days of turquoise water, saccharine cocktails, and a blessed severance from the digital tether. Now, midway through, I craved nothing more than my neglected laptop, yearning for any stray signal, any data point that might illuminate the encroaching shadows. It began subtly, like a hairline crack in porcelain. On our second day navigating the vast blue, the absence of my cabin neighbor, Isabel Thorne, began to prickle at the edge of my awareness. We'd exchanged pleasantries during the mandatory muster drill. She, traveling solo to commemorate her 40th year, radiated an infectious enthusiasm for the ship's promised diversions. Then silence, vanished from the sun-drenched Lido deck, absent from the clatter of dining halls, unseen at the nightly spectacles. Initially, I spun plausible threads, divergent rhythms perhaps. She, an early bird embracing the gym's solitary hum while I lingered in slumber? Or maybe sequestered by a fierce sunburn, nursing her discomfort in private. The tendrils of genuine worry only took hold on the third day. A tentative knock on her door, an invitation to the evening's comedy act poised on my lips, met only dead air. Later, another attempt yielded the same unnerving emptiness. Day 4 saw me navigate the polished expanse to the guest services counter. Behind it stood Julian, his name etched on a small badge, offering a smile as smooth and impermeable as polished plastic while I articulated my unease. "I assure you, madam, your neighbor is likely quite well," he purred, the cadence fractionally too practiced. Many guests cherish their solitude, enjoying the cabin amenities, the balcony's vista, perhaps. I persisted. "Could you verify, at least, if her keycard has registered entry, or if room service has been summoned?" Julian's smile remained fixed, a rigid mask, but behind it, a micro-expression flickered, irritation, or something closer to alarm. "Regrettably, madam, such information falls under passenger confidentiality protocols. You understand. Was there some other way I might assist you today?" I retreated, profoundly unsettled. His response felt like a deflection, a veneer too perfect, shielding something unseen. That night, sleep was a distant shore. I lay rigid in my berth, straining for any murmur from the adjoining space. Bulkheads on these floating cities were notoriously thin. The ghost of a television's glow, the creak of floorboards, the hiss of a shower, surely something should permeate the silence. Instead, only profound stillness reigned. As I wrestled with the sheets, a colder realization dawned. It wasn't merely Isabel I hadn't glimpsed. Recollections surfaced of others absent from the ship's current tableau. The gentle elderly couple flanking me at the captain's welcome dinner. The boisterous cohort of university students who dominated the poolside bar early on. Consciousness became a frantic scramble through increasingly alarming hypotheses, each more unsettling than the last. By the time dawn's first tentative rays pierced my porthole, a low-grade panic had fully bloomed. I dedicated day 5 to observation, true observation, positioning myself in the grand atrium, a novel serving as flimsy camouflage. I charted the human currents, the subtle choreography of passengers and crew. Patterns began to emerge from the noise. Uniformed staff exchanging low, urgent whispers, their gazes skittering nervously, certain corridors discreetly barricaded, passengers rerouted with bland pronouncements of routine upkeep. And the passengers themselves. The tide felt perceptibly lower. The celestial tide wasn't deserted, not precisely, but the vibrant density of the initial days had thinned. Spaces once thronged now offered breathing room. cues that had snaked now flowed with unnerving ease. As hours bled into one another, my disquiet metastasized. I snagged fragments of dialogue, other voices echoing my own nascent fears. Yet, invariably, a crew member would materialize, seemingly from nowhere, deftly redirecting the conversation, offering a complimentary aperitif, a distraction wrapped in practiced charm. By evening, the pressure was unbearable. Answers were imperative. I steered myself back towards guest services, resolve hardening my steps. Nearing the counter, however, I saw Julian locked in intense dialogue with a man whose bearing marked him as ship's security. Their faces were stark, stripped of professional pleasantries. I slowed, feigning interest in a nearby display, straining to capture their words. "Can't maintain containment much longer," Julian hissed, his usual suave composure utterly fractured. "They're beginning to connect the dots." The security officer gave a grim, tight nod. "Acknowledged. We're stretching resources thin, but if a resolution isn't found imminently..." His sentence dissolved as his eyes caught mine. Instantly, both men underwent a startling metamorphosis, their features reassembling into masks of affable service. "Good evening, madam," Julian chirped, the brightness jarring. "How may we enhance your crew's experience today?" I faltered, the carefully rehearsed questions dying on my tongue. The speed and totality of their transformation momentarily made me question my own senses. I was merely inquiring about this evening's entertainment," I stammered, despising the tremor of cowardice in my voice. While Julian enumerated the night's diversions, my thoughts raced elsewhere. What containment, what resolution, and the unspoken nexus? What did any of it have to do with the vanishing guests? Offering mumbled thanks, I turned away, head swimming. I needed perspective, a strategy. Seeking clarity, I ascended to the topmost deck. The night air caressed my skin, thick with the perfume of salt and unseen blossoms under a canopy of diamond dust stars. The very picture of brochure-perfect tropical serenity under different stars, paradise. I braced my hands on the cool metal railing, gazing into the churning phosphorescent wake trailing us, a luminous scar leading back. To what? What secrets lay submerged in our passage? What unknown shores awaited? A faint sound spun me around. A woman approached, her features rendered ethereal by the moonlight. Recognition sparked. We'd shared a brief poolside chat on the first day. "You can't sleep either?" she murmured, her smile a fragile thing that didn't quite convince. I shook my head. Too many thoughts circling, I suppose. She nodded, coming to stand beside me at the rail. We stood for a long beat in shared silence, twin figures contemplating the immense, swallowing darkness of the sea. "Have you noticed?" she began finally, her voice a conspiratorial whisper just above the ocean's sigh, "that people seem to be fading, disappearing?" My pulse leaped. Not just me, then. "Yes," I exhaled, the word catching in my throat. "My neighbor, Isabel. Haven't seen her for days." The woman, Maya, the name surfaced now, turned fully towards me, her eyes enormous pools of fear in the dim light. "My husband," she choked out. "He went for ice just down the corridor last night. He never returned. Guest services. They fed me a line about sudden, severe seasickness. Said he's in the infirmary. Her voice cracked, but when I tried to see him, they refused. Claimed it was quarantined, a possible norovirus situation. Ice traced a path down my spine. Did you believe them? Maya shook her head, a slow, desolate motion. I don't know what to believe anymore, only that something is fundamentally wrong on this ship. As if summoned by her words, a raw shriek tore through the velvet tranquility of the night. Maya and I recoiled, spinning towards the source, the deck directly below. We scrambled for the nearest stairs, adrenaline singing in our veins. Reaching the lower level, we found a knot of passengers coalescing near the starboard railing. Elbowing through the onlookers, we broke free at the front, just as a crewman hauled someone bodily back from the brink. A young woman, scarcely out of her teens, fought wildly against his restraint, her sobs ragged and desperate. "Let me go!" she screamed, her voice shrill with terror. "You have to let me off. They aren't human." A ripple of unease spread through the small crowd. An older man, his uniform denoting senior rank, moved decisively through the throng, projecting authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, kindly return to your staterooms," he commanded, his tone placid but absolute. "The young lady has indulged excessively in sun and spirits. She requires rest. We will ensure she receives appropriate care." Yet, as they steered the still thrashing woman away, her eyes locked with mine for a fleeting, terrifying second. There was no trace of intoxication in that gaze, only undiluted, primal fear. Maya's fingers dug into my arm, sharp points against my skin. "Did you hear her?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "They aren't human. Clara, what did she mean?" I shook my head, incapable of speech. My mind buckled, struggling to integrate this latest horror into the already fractured picture. The disappearances, the crew's unsettling secrecy. Now this. The pattern was too cohesive, too sinister for mere coincidence. As the onlookers gradually melted back into the ship's shadowed corridors, Maya and I remained frozen, rooted to the deck. The exquisite beauty of the night had curdled, feeling suddenly predatory. The gentle sway of the vessel, once soporific, now felt like the rocking of a cradle over an abyss. "What do we do?" Maya breathed, the question hanging heavy in the salt-laden air. I drew a deep, steadying breath, astonished by the unexpected firmness in my own voice. "We find out what's happening," I declared. "Whatever truth this ship conceals, we uncover it, before we become the next unexplained absence." Turning back towards the labyrinthine passages leading to our cabins, a silent accord passing between us, I felt an invisible threshold being crossed. The sun-drenched idyll was irrevocably shattered. We were navigating uncharted territory now, sailing headlong into a mystery far deeper, far darker than the fathomless ocean beneath our feet. And a chilling whisper echoed in the recesses of my mind. Even if we unearthed the truth, would we survive the voyage to share it? The old ranch received me on an afternoon thick with humidity, a clipboard clutched in one hand, rolled building plans in the other. My shirt clung damply to my spine. The dust of the long gravel approach was a gritty film on my tongue. My vision was clear, crystalline, transform this dilapidated collection of barns and outbuildings into a vibrant nucleus of culture. Workshops here, performance spaces there, corners consecrated to artistic communion. My thoughts were grounded in the tangible. Load-bearing walls, roof integrity, the intricate veins of electrical wiring. Folklore held no currency for me, nor did tales of the peculiar, yet from the instant my boots touched that soil, a dissonance hummed beneath the surface. Crossing the main yard, small scuttlings rustled from within the largest barn's shadowed mouth. An animal, I presumed initially. Then I registered the echo of my own tread. Yet it wasn't a simple replication. It sounded disturbingly like a second set of footfalls, mirroring mine from the unseen side of the wall, a mocking counterstep. A jolt tightened my chest. My pulse surged, a frantic drum against my ribs. I drew a quick, shallow breath, reasoning it away as warped acoustics, the way sound behaves in cavernous, empty structures. Inside, stepping gingerly over warped planks, the air hung heavy with the ghosts of old hay and the dank perfume of decaying wood. I scanned the gloom, eyes straining. Nothing, not a raccoon, not a nesting bird, nothing to account for the sound. My imagination, I chided myself, running riot. This was meant to be straightforward demolition, practical reconstruction. With a mental shrug, I returned to my survey. The ensuing days were a blur of excavation, clearing away the detritus of neglect. I unearthed heaps of antiquated tools, oxidized nails like rusty thorns, fractured skeletons of furniture, and stiffened horse tack huddled in corners. Dust coated my gloves, grit stung my eyes. Load after load vanished into the trailer, hauled away to the designated dump site. Amidst this labor, the land maintained a stoic silence, broken only by the occasional sigh of wind through dry grass. Still moments would catch me unaware. A pause in my work, convinced I'd heard footsteps just behind me, or the faint melody of voices carried on the breeze. A swift turn, a sharp scan of the yard, always revealing only emptiness. It was the 6th day. I was perched high on a ladder, wrestling with holes in the main barn's roof, balancing hammer, nails, raw timber. The sun beat down, sweat tracing paths down my temples. As I hammered home a fresh board, a voice brushed against my hearing. Distant, soft, like intimate murmurs shared across an impossible distance. I froze, heart hammering against my ribs. The hammer slipped, a near fatal fumble. I clung desperately to the ladder rung, craning my neck. Below, the property stretched vacant. My truck by the fence, the empty fields rolling away. My throat constricted. Dehydration, perhaps. The relentless heat playing tricks. I swallowed hard, gathered the frayed edges of my nerve, and grimly finished the repair. Evening descended, and I resolved to patrol the grounds with a flashlight, needing to assess the smaller, crumbling outbuildings. The sensation of being watched prickled at the back of my neck. My steps felt leaden on the gravel path. The night air hung motionless, yet a low rustle whispered from the weeds nearby. My flashlight beam carved through the darkness, illuminating scattered refuse. Shards of glass glinting like fallen stars, corroded hinges, coils of frayed rope. I kicked aside a loose plank. Behind me, something shifted. I spun, heart leaping, the cone of light trembling violently in my grip. At first, only the familiar void of the yard met my eyes. Then, near one of the sheds, a shape flickered, tall, stooped, crowned with what seemed unnervingly like horns or antlers. It moved with startling swiftness, melting behind the shed's wall. Breath hitched in my throat, my palms grew slick. Tentatively, I advanced, pinning the spot with light. "Hey," I called out, "who's there?" Only my own voice answered, thin and strained in the stillness. My breathing sounded ragged, loud in my own ears. I forced myself onward, rounding the corner of the shed. Piles of old bricks, a stack of rotting lumber, nothing more. No footprints disturbed the packed earth, no sign of concealment. I listened. Silence pressed in. A wave of relief washed over me, quickly chased by a residue of profound unease. A trick of the light, I insisted internally, a shadow puppet thrown by my own unsteady beam. Yet the shape had possessed a disturbing solidity, a sense of purpose in its movement. Morning found me stiff and tense, rising early from a hard cot in the property's small, musty farmhouse. Coffee did little to dispel the unease. Outside, dew silvered the ground, my boots leaving clear prints in the damp soil as I circled the barn, seeking daylight confirmation of the night's strangeness. Near the shed, I discovered a faint indentation in the dirt, too blurred and smeared for certain identification. A deer, maybe, a stray dog. Crouching, I ran my hand over the spot. The earth felt cool, crumbling beneath my touch. The distinct sensation of someone standing directly behind me returned, but a swift glance revealed only solitude. Despite the fraying state of my nerves, work demanded attention. The afternoon was spent measuring interior walls in the second barn, envisioning it reborn as a gallery space. As my tape measure spanned one wall, a distinct scrape echoed from the opposite side, the sound of claws or something jagged dragging across timber. A heavy thud resonated in my chest. Wiping sweat from my upper lip, I compelled myself to investigate. Slowly, I crossed the creaking floorboards, the barn's interior painted in dull grays by the light filtering through a single grimy window. In a shadowed corner, fresh scratch marks marred the wood. Chest high, they crisscrossed in sharp diagonals. My breath caught. Touching the grooves, my fingertips registered their depth. The wood was splintered, violated. A tingling crawled across my scalp. This felt deliberate, malicious. There was no easy explanation. I retreated to my truck, phone heavy in my hand. The impulse to call someone, anyone, warred with a stubborn insistence on handling this myself. Construction problems, leaky pipes, faulty wiring, these were my domain. Lurking shapes and inexplicable vandalism were not. Yet the fear of sounding unhinged held me back. Pocketing the phone, I opted for a different approach. A trip into town yielded motion sensor cameras and batteries. Before sunset, I had them mounted strategically around the barns and near the sheds, testing their range, ensuring their low-light capabilities. Locking the barns felt like a flimsy precaution before I retreated to the farmhouse for the night. Sleep offered little refuge. Small thuds punctuated the silence outside, followed by profound quiet. Around midnight, a flicker of light pulsed beneath the farmhouse door. A sensor triggered. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm. I contemplated arming myself with a tire iron, a heavy wrench, but remained rooted to the cot, forcing a semblance of calm. After what felt like an eternity spent listening to the frantic beat of my own blood, I finally succumbed to an exhausted, uneasy slumber. First thing in the morning, I retrieved the cameras. The data logs showed several activations clustered around midnight. The footage, however, was maddeningly inconclusive. Fleeting blurs, indistinct movements. One camera captured a shadow engulfing the barn door, vast and swift, gone in less than a second. A knot of cold fear tightened in my stomach. Proof of a sort that something shared this space, yet its nature remained terrifyingly obscure. The renovation pressed on. I wrestled new boards into place, tore down rusted sheet metal, even shored up the farmhouse's sagging porch. Through the daylight hours, the faint echoes persisted, whispers snagging on the edge of hearing, sometimes seeming to emanate from just behind me, other times drifting down from the high rafters. Climbing up to investigate yielded only old nests and shrouds of cobwebs. My hands, I noticed, had developed a tremor when those sounds arose. My breath would catch. My fists clench involuntarily. Focus on the task I commanded myself. Hammering nails, sawing planks, attempting to build a wall of labor against the encroaching dread. One afternoon, hauling debris from the farthest, most dilapidated barn, I stepped outside into a sudden, inexplicable chill. The day was hot. The cold air on my skin was a physical shock. The wind simultaneously gusted, slamming the heavy barn door shut behind me with startling force. I spun, yanking at the handle. It resisted, felt solid as if braced from within. Panic flared. I threw my weight into it and the door yielded abruptly. Inside, emptiness. Dust motes dancing in slanted light, scattered junk, silent beams. My hands trembled as I stepped back. From above, a low growl vibrated through the air. My head snapped up. High in the rafters, obscured by shadow, a shape crouched. Dark, dense details lost in the gloom. A current like electricity shot up my spine. Stumbling backward, I nearly tripped over stacked lumber. I fumbled for my flashlight, aiming its beam upward, but it only illuminated a swirling galaxy of dust. When my eyes adjusted again, the shape was gone. I fled outside, gasping for air, hands braced on my knees, struggling for equilibrium. Was I losing my mind? Could some large animal have taken residence? Yet the barns felt too frail to support anything of significant size, and the image of horns, antlers, lingered, refusing to be dismissed. I forced myself to walk the perimeter again, scanning the hazy tree line. Grass rustled, gravel crunched. A dull ache throbbed in my lower back, born of pure tension. No movement, only the quiet fields, the indifferent trees. That night, sleep was not an option. I sat in the farmhouse living room, flashlight resting heavy in my lap, windows open to the still air, listening. Around 1 in the morning, a solid thump resonated from the porch. My chest seized. Swallowing hard, I rose, flashlight beam cutting a path before me, heart pounding like a drum against my ribs. I crept to the window and peered out. The porch light cast a weak, yellow glow, but it was enough. A tall silhouette stood near the steps, broad-shouldered, and yes, something protruded from its head. Horns sharp against the lesser dark. My scalp prickled with cold dread. My hand reached for the doorknob, hesitated. I remained frozen, staring through the glass, waiting for my eyes to fully adjust, to make sense of the impossible. After several agonizing seconds, the shape moved, stepping off the porch with an unnerving fluidity and vanishing into the deeper shadows of the yard. I had to know. Forcing myself, flashlight held like a weapon, I went outside. My heart hammered, my stomach churned. The light swept across the porch boards, down the steps. The wood groaned under my weight. There, pressed into the damp earth, were faint impressions. Hoofprints? They were oddly spaced, suggesting a bipedal gait, an unholy fusion. Squatting, I traced the beam over them. My hands shook uncontrollably. The night was utterly silent, save for the ragged sound of my own breathing. I tried to follow the tracks, but they dissolved into the undifferentiated ground after only a few yards. A hollow void opened in my chest. I lingered outside for several minutes more, sweeping the darkness with my light, but saw nothing further. The following day, I called Elias, a friend in the contracting business. Could he spare a couple of workers? I needed to accelerate the timeline, I explained, citing unforeseen delays. No mention of silhouettes, impossible tracks, or guttural growls. Just the acceptable fiction of being behind schedule. They arrived the next morning, their large truck loaded with tools and lumber, a welcome intrusion of the ordinary. With more bodies on site, I reasoned, surely whatever haunted this place would retreat. We spent the day in a frenzy of activity, tearing out rotten beams, clearing mountains of debris, framing new supports. I kept an ear tuned for the unusual, but the day remained blessedly, strangely quiet. Perhaps the presence of others acted as a deterrent. Once, hauling trash towards the dumpster, a flicker of movement at the distant tree line caught my eye. I paused, the heavy bag leaning against my leg. A dark shape slipped behind a thick trunk and was gone. My heart gave a heavy thump, but I forced the observation down, returning to the noisy normalcy of the work site. The others reported nothing strange. I kept my sighting to myself. As evening approached, they packed up, their truck rumbling away down the gravel road, leaving behind a silence that felt suddenly amplified, pregnant with renewed tension. I was alone again. That night, another ritualistic check of the camera footage. Seated at the farmhouse's small table, laptop glowing, I reviewed the day's recordings. Nothing during the work hours, but then, captured around sunset, one camera overlooking the tall grass near the main barn showed a shape moving through the stalks, bulky, indistinct, yet possessing that strange, disturbing outline around the head. The fine hairs on my arms rose. I clicked through the frames, agonizingly slow. The figure traversed the camera's view in perhaps 3 seconds. Unidentifiable. My mouth went dry. My heart resumed its heavy, anxious beat. One more week. I granted myself that, determined to complete the essential structural repairs before handing off the project. After that, a permanent crew could inherit this troubled space. Each day became a race against sundown, a focused effort to keep my hands busy, my mind occupied, replacing siding, reinforcing floors, prepping walls for insulation. The work was a shield, albeit a flimsy one. At night, the faint sounds returned, a distant clatter, the whisper of scratching. But I resisted the urge to investigate, hugging the relative safety of the farmhouse. The tension became a permanent resident in my shoulders, a knot beneath my ribs. Sleep was shallow, frequently interrupted. My last day, I finalized the tasks I'd set for myself, then walked through each renovated space, clipboard in hand, making notes for the incoming crew. Standing in the cavernous main barn, surveying the sturdy new beams, a low grunt sounded directly behind me. I spun, heart seizing. Framed in the wide doorway, a tall silhouette lingered just long enough for its form to register clearly. Broad chest, the unmistakable silhouette of horns. Then, with startling speed, it darted from view. My hands began to shake violently, breath locked in my throat. A full-body shiver coursed through me. Backing away, I collided with a support post, nearly dropping my notes. I scrambled outside into the bright indifference of daylight, eyes darting frantically across the yard. Nothing stirred but the wind teasing the grass. I locked everything meticulously, climbed into my truck, and sat for a full minute, dragging air into my lungs. My chest felt painfully tight. Sweat slicked my neck despite the mild air. Finally, I turned the key, the engine roaring to life. As I drove away, the barns receded in my rearview mirror. Peaceful, inert structures basking in the sun. But I knew better. Something resided there, something ancient or alien, defying practical fixes and rational explanations. The tightness in my chest didn't begin to ease until the old ranch was miles behind me. What exactly roamed that blighted property? What intelligence whispered in the decaying timbers remains unknown. I passed the camera footage to the new crew lead, advising only vigilance. No final reports have reached me, yet the sensations linger. The weight of unseen eyes, the phantom echo of footsteps in dusty corridors, the indelible image of horns slipping into shadow. Should fate ever compel my return, I'll be armed with more than a flashlight and good intentions. Until then, the land can keep its secrets, buried deep in the soil and the silence. The village received me under the declining sun, its single track utterly empty as I trudged onto it. Houses of cold stone huddled together, some bearing ancient wooden doors and heavy, forbidding shutters. No automobiles disturbed the quiet, no street lamps offered solace against the encroaching gloom. The air bit sharp, etching the silhouettes of dark hills against the bruised sky behind the rooftops. Fatigue, a leaden weight from the long walk, settled deep in my bones. My small pack held little more than spare clothes, a torch, and a near-empty water flask. Shelter for the night was paramount. One dwelling, seemingly derelict, drew my eye. Its walls were rough-hewn stone, pierced by a modest wooden door, and windows sunk deep, their glass warped and imperfect. Hesitantly, I tested the door. It yielded with a groan, releasing an exhalation of damp rock and spectral dust. Inside, a single downstairs chamber offered a plain table, a solitary chair, and a small, cold hearth. A narrow flight of stairs spiraled upwards. Ascending, my footsteps echoed on the bare wood. The upper room contained a bed frame supporting a meager mattress, a small timber chest, and a window gazing out towards the darkening hills. A simple latch secured the room's door. The floorboards beneath my feet were uneven, protesting my weight with weary creaks. I felt the mattress, dry enough. Unburdening myself, I placed my few belongings upon the chest, resolving to rest here just this one night before pressing onward at first light. As the last vestiges of sunlight bled from the sky, a wind began to stir, whistling through unseen crevices in the window frame, leaching warmth from the room. I sat on the bed, peering out. Moonlight, surprisingly bright, sculpted the terrain beyond the glass. Near a line of skeletal houses, several dark forms stood stark against the lunar glow. People, it seemed, gathered in unnerving stillness. They remained utterly motionless. I watched them, straining to discern features or attire, but they were merely shapes, devoid of detail. After a time, I forced my gaze away, studying the rough texture of the interior wall. When I looked back, the space where they had stood was empty. They had vanished into the deepening shadows. Night fell absolute. Darkness consumed the room. Igniting my torch, I swept its beam across the door, verifying the latch. Solid enough, it seemed, yet the wind now clawed with greater insistence, rattling the window, making the glass shiver, and the wooden frame groan as if under immense pressure. Seeking a measure of security, I wedged the chair beneath the door handle. An unsettling wrongness prickled at my senses. No voices, no footfalls reached me, only the ceaseless lament of the wind. Then, a low resonance from outside the window, not speech but a faint, pervasive humming. Dousing the torch, I moved cautiously to the glass. Silhouettes shifted in the moonlight, several figures swaying with a slow, hypnotic rhythm, their limbs tracing languid arcs. I leaned closer, desperate to see faces, and then I saw their eyes, stark white orbs devoid of pupils reflecting the cold light, fixed directly upon me. I recoiled, heart hammering against my ribs, my hand gripping the sill. A deep breath did little to steady me, though no words formed. A palpable sense that they were chanting permeated the air, not sound precisely, but a vibration, too low and alien for language. Again, the wind assaulted the window, the glass shuddering violently. Fear spiked that it might shatter. My attention dropped to the floor. The boards were old, uneven. A faint sensation reached me through the soles of my boots, a scraping perhaps, a furtive scratching. Crouching, I pressed my ear to the rough timber. The sound was subtle yet undeniable. Something slithered beneath the floorboards. Not the quick scrabble of rats, but heavier, more deliberate. I straightened, glancing towards the door. The chair held firm. The latch remained engaged. Opening it was unthinkable. What waited in the darkness beyond? My torch beam probed the room's corners. Bare stone walls offered no comfort. The chest at the bed's foot appeared solid. I lifted the lid. Inside lay a folded blanket and a small metal box. Empty. I retrieved the blanket, spreading it over the thin mattress, trying to impose some normalcy, some calm. I listened intently. Outside, the wind howled, interwoven with that strange, wordless humming, rising and falling in eerie cadences. Inside, the furniture seemed alive, creaking in sympathy. The bed itself trembled slightly, a vibration transmitted from below through the very floor. Placing a hand on the frame confirmed it. The disturbance originated beneath me. Pulling back a corner of the threadbare rug revealed a loose floorboard. I pressed down. It resisted. Pulling risked noise, exposure. Through the window, the shapes persisted, swaying relentlessly, always oriented towards my prison. Their pale eyes, unblinking, seemed to absorb the moonlight. I could perceive the tilt of their heads as they rocked. A tentative tap of my finger on the glass elicited no reaction. They continued their silent, rhythmic motion, their ceaseless, soundless hum. Were their mouths moving? Impossible to tell. Only silhouettes and those luminous, vacant eyes were visible. A sudden pressure built in my ears, the air thickening, growing heavy. Simultaneously, the sound beneath the floor intensified. A distinct scraping now, accompanied by a low grinding. I retreated instinctively, pressing myself against the cold stone wall, gripping the torch like a weapon, its beam aimed downwards. The floorboards visibly quivered. Fine dust sifted up from the gaps between them. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Escape beckoned, yet the fear of finding those figures waiting at the door held me captive. Edging silently towards it, I pressed my ear against the wood. Silence from the other side, save for the house's own groans and the insidious noise from below. Should I risk it? The thought of the black stairwell descending into absolute unknown paralyzed me. I remained. The wind shrieked, the chanting intensified, or perhaps my perception of it sharpened. The silhouette swayed, inexorable. I dragged the bed closer to the window, a futile attempt to block the view, its legs screeching horribly against the floor. I froze, listening. The subterranean sound surged louder now, as if something pushed insistently upwards against the planks. Sweat beaded on my forehead, my throat felt like parchment, my water was gone. Drawing a ragged breath, I inventoried my meager resources. A torch, a pack of clothes, nothing more. Another violent gust slammed the window. The glass bowed inwards with a sickening crack. I tried stuffing the blanket into the gap between frame and pane, a useless gesture. Glancing out again, my breath caught. They were closer, pressed almost against the house wall, mere feet away. I could discern the rise and fall of their shoulders, a collective synchronous respiration. Their heads tilted in perfect unison. Their eyes, stark white, seemed to glow with their own internal luminescence. No features, no bodies, just outlines and those terrible eyes. Inside, the room seemed to conspire against me. The chest lid rattled, the chair by the door vibrated, the bed frame hummed with the energy from below. Dropping to my knees, I pressed my hands flat against the floorboards, feeling a steady, rhythmic thumping transmitted from the depths. Slow, measured, my stomach clenched, my legs trembled. A trap door, the loose board offered the only clue. I tried lifting it again. It yielded slightly, then jammed. A sharp scraping directly beneath sent me scrambling back. Standing, I fixed the torch beam on the board. Hairline cracks radiated outwards. More dust trickled free. Backing against the wall again, I watched, horrified as the board visibly flexed upwards. My jaw clenched. Silence was my only shield. The chanting swelled, no longer just a vibration, but a pressure filling my skull. The wind screamed, the silhouette swayed. I had to try the door. Sliding the chair away, I eased back the latch. Its click unnaturally loud. Pulling the door open, a mere crack revealed impenetrable darkness in the hallway. The stairs plunged down into nothingness. I listened. Only the house's complaints and the muffled grinding from the room behind me. Holding the torch low, I stepped out, testing each uneven stair. Downstairs, the main room lay cold and vacant. The torch beam swept across the familiar table and chair, the dark maw of the fireplace. I moved to the main door, the one leading outside. Closed. I tried the handle. Immovable. Pulling harder yielded nothing. It was utterly stuck. Pushing proved equally futile. Directing the light along the door's edges revealed the problem. It was sealed shut with a thick layer of what looked like hardened mud or clay. My fingernails scraped uselessly against its flinty surface. I lacked any tool to break the seal. A sharp crack echoed from upstairs, wood splintering. I spun and raced back up, bursting into the room. The loose floorboard had lifted further, revealing a dark gap. Something was forcing its way up. I thrust the torch beam into the opening. Darkness swam, and then something pale, indistinct, recoiled instantly from the light. I retreated, keeping the torch trained on the gap. My hand shaking uncontrollably, my mouth was utterly dry. A shuffling sound commenced beneath the floor, moving towards the wall, then circling the perimeter of the room. Scraping, tapping, questing. With a surge of desperate strength, I dragged the heavy chest over the violated board. The noise it made deafening in the tense silence. I froze, listening. The subterranean sounds paused, then resumed their circuitous scraping along the room's edges. The chanting surged again, vibrating within my very thoughts. Gripping the torch, I stared at the window. The silhouettes were now pressed flat against the outer wall, their eyes burning directly into the room. No mouths moved, yet their humming felt louder, clearer. I averted my gaze from those glowing eyes. The wind howled, threatening to finally breach the window's fragile defense. A sudden, violent jolt from below. The chest shifted. I threw my weight against it, planting my foot firmly, but it slid again. Whatever lay beneath possessed unnerving strength. The floorboards groaned, protesting the upward pressure. I scanned the room for anything else heavy. The bed was too light, the chair insignificant. Leave the room again? But where could I go? The sealed door below, the unknown layout of the rest of this stone trap. The thick walls outside offered no escape. The entire place felt hermetically sealed. Leaning hard on the chest, I felt the vibrations course through me. My heart hammered, breath came in ragged gasps. Then a new horror. Tapping began on the window pane. Slow, deliberate taps, like fingernails on glass. Tiny cracks spiderwebbed across the surface. I swung the torch beam towards the sound. The shapes flinched back slightly but did not disperse. The tapping resumed, steady, patient. Crack! The floorboard beneath the chest finally gave way. I leaped back as the heavy box tilted precariously. A long, slender object thrust upwards through the gap, grayish, rough-textured like a length of desiccated wood or bone. It twisted, scraping against the side of the chest. Reacting instinctively, I kicked at it. My boot connected and the object retracted sharply, vanishing below. A final scrape echoed as it retreated beneath the boards. I gasped for breath, chest tight, wiping sweat from my brow. Immediately, the figures outside struck the window again. A small piece of glass tinkled inwards, leaving a jagged hole. Cold night air rushed in. Through the aperture, a single pale eye stared. I stumbled back, raising the torch, shining it directly into that white orb. The shape outside recoiled, pulling away from the opening. The light, it repelled them. I kept the beam fixed on the window. Beneath the floor, the scraping moved to a corner, followed by a dull thump. Then, silence. I stood rigid, torch aimed at the window, waiting. The chanting persisted, a maddening pressure wave. The silhouette swayed, keeping a cautious distance from the hole in the glass. Tapping now on the window frame, testing its integrity. I held the light steady, forcing them back. How long would the batteries last? The thought was a cold spike of fear. I pushed it away. The wind raged. Roof beams groaned overhead. Dust rained down. Focus, sleep was impossible. I began to pace, checking the gap in the floor, still partially open, mostly blocked by the chest. I swept the light there periodically. Nothing stirred. My legs ached, but sitting felt like surrender. The rhythmic tapping, the memory of scraping, the incessant hum. A terrifying symphony. My heart felt bruised from its frantic pace. Breathing remained shallow, rapid. Slowly, agonizingly, the blackness outside began to soften. A subtle shift, a dilution of the dark. The wind persisted, fierce as ever. But through it, I discerned the faintest blush of gray on the horizon. The silhouettes outside seemed to sense it too. They drew back from the window, melting into the deeper shadows near the other houses. Their humming faded, dissipated. I watched them retreat until the space beyond the glass was empty once more. The tapping ceased. Below the floor, one final faint scrape, then profound silence. I waited, torch beams still probing the gap, but nothing emerged. Only the wind remained, its voice now seeming ordinary, stripped of its malevolent chorus. Approaching the window, I peered out cautiously. Empty space, stark outlines of stone houses against a lightening sky. The figures were gone. The only sound was the wind whistling through the structure's many cracks. Downstairs, I had to try the door again. Leaving the violated room, I descended the creaking stairs. Kneeling by the main door, I examined the seal. Using a splintered piece of the chair leg I'd wedged upstairs, I began chipping furiously at the hardened mud. Minutes passed in frantic labor until, finally, the latch yielded. I wrenched the door open. Cold, clean morning air flooded in, a blessed shock. The street outside lay silent, deserted. No figures, no eyes, no movement. I stepped across the threshold, leaving the stone house and its horrors behind me. Relief washed over me, the open air a balm. I walked away quickly, resolutely not looking back at that window, nor thinking of the splintered gap in the floor. Onward, until the village was swallowed by the distance. I encountered no one, nothing more, just an old place of silent stone. I kept moving, driven by the vow never to spend another night within its grasp. The instant my gaze fell upon the vermilion sigils staining the warehouse concrete, a certainty colder than the night air settled in my gut. This trespass was leagues deeper, darker than mere youthful folly. What began as an idle deviation from my usual path home from lectures would soon spiral into a vortex of arcane rites and primordial dread, threatening not only my fragile existence but the very weave of perceived reality. My name is Elias. Until that fateful evening, I navigated the predictable currents of university life, a landscape defined by looming exams and weekend distractions, utterly oblivious to the horrors festering just beyond the periphery of the mundane. Yet destiny, it seems, possesses a grim inclination for drafting the unprepared into its most shadowy campaigns. It was a Friday, the city breathing out the week's exhaustion. I traversed the familiar route home after a prolonged session in the campus library's quiet hum. Street lamps bled long, skeletal shadows across the pavement, as I cut through the skeletal remains of the old industrial sector, a path worn smooth by countless prior passages. But tonight, a discontinuity snagged my attention. The barest suggestion of motion, a flicker against the grime-streaked pane of a derelict warehouse window. Curiosity, that treacherous siren call of the young and reckless, took hold. What student, after all, can resist the allure of urban decay, the whispered promise of forgotten spaces? I drew near, the structure's weathered brick flanks looming like ancient ramparts against the bruised twilight sky. Its main door hung slightly ajar, a dark mouth exhaling faint, indistinct murmurs. "Anyone there?" I called, my voice thin against the vast silence, nudging the heavy door inward. "Hello?" The interior yawned, a cavern swallowing light, populated by shadows that seemed to possess a life of their own, writhing and coalescing in the anemic shafts of moonlight piercing the filth-caked windows. As my vision acclimated to the profound gloom, I saw them, a congregation, hunched figures forming a tight circle in the building's heart. A low, rhythmic chant emanated from them, a drone that vibrated not just in the air but deep within my bones, raising gooseflesh. Logic screamed retreat, urged me to melt back into the night, yet an unnerving fascination, a morbid gravity, pinned me to the spot. Stealthily, I advanced, seeking refuge behind a bulwark of decaying crates. It was then the sigils fully registered, elaborate, unsettling geometries rendered in a substance whose wet sheen and dark crimson hue screamed blood. Candles strategically placed at nexus points within the design guttered, casting a phantasmal, pulsing luminescence upon the tableau. The celebrants were swathed in obsidian robes, their features swallowed by the abyssal depths of their hoods. At the circle's epicenter rested an altar, crudely fashioned, and upon it, a choked gasp caught in my throat. A form lay there, starkly still, undeniably human. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat I felt sure must betray my presence. Fumbling for my phone, a lifeline, a call for help, my trembling fingers betrayed me. The device slipped, the sharp clatter of plastic shattering the ritualistic calm like a gunshot in a cathedral. Instantaneously, the chanting ceased. As one, the robed figures pivoted, their unseen gazes locking onto my hiding place. "An interloper," intoned a voice, imbued with an unnatural resonance that scraped along my nerves. "Fetch him." There was no thought, only instinct. I bolted, legs pumping with a speed fueled by primal terror. Footfalls pounded heavily behind me, closing the distance with terrifying rapidity. Just as my fingers brushed the rough wood of the exit door, a hand clamped onto my jacket, yanking me violently backward. I spun, flailing wildly, my fist connected with something yielding yet solid. A sharp grunt followed. The grip slackened momentarily. Enough. I wrenched free, bursting out into the cold embrace of the night. But they pursued, relentless. I heard them, their harsh, eager breaths, the relentless slap of their feet on the pavement. Streets I'd navigated my entire life, warped into hostile, alien territories, their familiar shadows now grasping claws, seeking to trip me. How long I ran, how I evaded them, remains a blur, a frantic montage of pounding heartbeats and burning lungs. Eventually, utterly spent, I found myself in an unfamiliar district, collapsing against a grimy brick wall, sucking desperately at the air. As the adrenaline tide receded, the stark horror of what I'd witnessed crashed down. A cult, not a story, not a movie, a genuine blood ritual performing cult, operating in the city's neglected heart. And the body, sacrifice, or something far more monstrous. The police flashed through my mind, but the thought withered. My word against what? Who? I possessed no tangible proof, only a frantic narrative steeped in terror. A chilling intuition whispered that this group wielded influence, the sort that quietly erases inconvenient truths and the people who stumble upon them. The journey back to my apartment was a gauntlet of perceived threats. Every shadow seemed to hold a hooded watcher, every distant sound a pursuing footstep. Finally reaching my door, I fumbled with the lock, slammed it shut, jammed a chair beneath the knob, a flimsy barricade against an encroaching nightmare, and fell onto my bed, limbs trembling. Sleep offered no sanctuary. Closing my eyes conjured only the sanguine glyphs, the resonant drone of the chant. Beneath it all pulsed a certainty, cold and absolute. This was merely the beginning. I was not wrong. Morning light revealed a fresh horror. Carved into the wood of my apartment door was the central sigil from the warehouse floor. Ice traced its way down my spine. They knew who I was, where I slept. The day dissolved into a haze of panic. I oscillated between frantic pacing and cowering in corners, starting violently at every creak and groan of the old building. As dusk bled into true night, a fresh wave of terror washed over me. Would they come under the cloak of darkness? Then I heard it, a faint, deliberate scratching at my door. Breath held captive in my chest. I prayed it was merely frayed nerves, but the prayer died unspoken as I watched the doorknob begin to turn, slow, steady, inexorable. Thought evaporated. Pure reaction took its place. I seized my backpack, crammed in clothes, my laptop, essentials for an escape I hadn't planned, but now desperately needed, and scrambled for the fire escape. Even as I swung out the window, the sound of my front door splintering open echoed from within. A cloaked figure filled the frame, its face a void within the hood's shadow. "You cannot flee us, Elias," it declared, the voice that same otherworldly vibration from the warehouse. "What has been witnessed cannot be unwitnessed. You are woven into this now." I didn't linger for elaboration. I descended the rattling metal stairs, plunging into the anonymity of the night, directionless save for the imperative, away. Days bled together into a fugitive existence. Sleep was snatched in the harsh fluorescence of 24-hour diners, the uncomfortable embrace of bus station benches. Always glancing back, always scanning crowds for the telltale silhouette of a hooded robe. It was on the fourth day, huddled in the relative sanctuary of the public library, attempting to dredge answers from the internet's depths about the symbols I couldn't forget, that a hand settled gently on my shoulder. I nearly levitated from my chair. "Steady," a low voice murmured. "I mean you no harm." I turned, heart galloping, to face a young woman near my own age. Her eyes held a surprising kindness, yet beneath it lay a resilience, a hardness forged by sights best left unseen. "My name is Maya," she said, her gaze steady, "and I believe we have much to discuss." Over lukewarm coffee in a nearby greasy spoon, Maya unfurled her own narrative. A parallel experience, stumbling upon a clandestine ritual, a forbidden glimpse. But where I had fled, she had delved, unearthing tendrils of a conspiracy stretching back through centuries. They style themselves the Obsidian Coil, she explained, her voice hushed but intense. Their doctrine centers on achieving immortality, communion with entities, beings not native to our understanding of reality, all fueled by sacrifice. My head swam. The words felt alien, impossible. But why me? Why hunt me? Maya's expression hardened. Because you saw. You became a loose thread, or what? I urged, leaning forward. Or a potential asset. They perpetually seek fresh initiates, particularly the young, those with an uncanny propensity for finding doors best left unopened. Nausea churned within me. The prospect of joining those abominations, of participating in their grotesque rites, unthinkable. Yet the alternative, a lifetime spent fleeing shadows, perpetually hunted, that too felt like a slow death. What do we do? The question escaped me, raw and desperate. A fierce, determined smile touched Maya's lips, a spark that somehow kindled a flicker within my own exhausted spirit. We resist. There are others, Elias, a network, people who've glimpsed the abyss and refuse to avert their eyes. We gather knowledge, evidence, we build our case, and when the time is right, we intend to shatter their entire structure. It sounded utterly mad, perilous, likely fatal. But gazing into Maya's resolute eyes, I felt something stir, something I hadn't known since that night in the warehouse, a fragile sliver of hope. Count me in, I heard myself say, surprised by the unexpected firmness in my voice. How do we begin? Maya's smile widened, sharp and focused. First, we secure you, find a safe harbor. Then the real work starts, your education. Because believe me, Elias, the horrors you've encountered thus far, they are merely the surface ripples of a very deep, very dark ocean. As we exited the diner, stepping back into the waiting night, the air itself felt altered. The shadows still stretched long and menacing. The peril hadn't lessened. Yet for the first time in days, the crushing weight of isolation had lifted. The future remained a terrifying unknown, a path shrouded in uncertainty and potential doom. Success against the coil seemed a distant, improbable dream, but this much I knew. I had peered behind the comforting veil of normalcy, witnessed the darkness gnawing at the world's edges. And knowing it exists, truly knowing, makes ignorance impossible. So here I stand, an unwitting conscript in a clandestine war, waged in the shadows of oblivious lives. The path forward promises danger, horrors yet unimagined. But following Maya into the deepening night, poised to begin whatever comes next, a novel sense of purpose solidifies within me. For sometimes confronting the encroaching darkness demands stepping directly into it, armed only with your own small, defiant light. And that is precisely what I intend to do. The quiet shattered on my second night within those ancient walls. Sleep, tentatively claimed hours earlier, dissolved at the sound of footfalls overhead. not the scuttling of pests, but the measured, heavy tread of boots grinding against floorboards, somewhere directly above my bed. My heart became a frantic drum against my ribs as I lay rigid, gaze fixed on the stained plaster ceiling. Intruder, or some creature burrowing in the rafters. The unnerving truth, however, was the utter absence of any official attic space. The deed described 2 floors, stark and simple. Yet mere days after arriving, I'd stumbled upon it. A narrow flight of stairs concealed behind a listing, warped bookcase on the upper landing, ascending into a cramped, dust-choked void beneath the eaves. Up there, amidst the grime, I'd found them, unsettling sigils gouged into the timber. Since that discovery, the nights had stretched taut with an unnamed apprehension. I am Arthur Pendleton, a man whose life had settled into the unremarkable grooves of middle age, devoid of grand expectations. Inheritance was a notion belonging to other families, other lives. Then came the solicitor's letter, informing me of the passing of some forgotten branch on the family tree, a relation utterly unknown. I was, it seemed, the last inheritor. Keys were enclosed. The property, nestled somewhere remote, was mine outright, no strings attached. Curiosity, perhaps tinged with a vague hope of minor windfall, prompted me to investigate. I anticipated dilapidation, a shell to be potentially mended or swiftly sold. The reality awaiting me was something altogether different. The house hunched on its sprawling acreage, besieged by skeletal trees and dense, grasping undergrowth. Its skin of paint had mostly sloughed away, exposing weathered gray wood beneath. The porch steps groaned a weary protest under my weight. Several window panes bore the spiderweb cracks of neglect, and the front door yielded only to a determined shoulder shove. Stepping inside for the first time was like breaching a tomb, the air thick with the scent of damp decay and aged timber, dust motes dancing like spectral plankton in the stray shafts of sunlight. Every footstep coaxed a chorus of creaks and sighs from the protesting floorboards. The ground floor comprised a living room, haunted by a tattered sofa and a listing coffee table, dominated by a tall grandfather clock eternally frozen at 3:30. A dim hallway, a functional but grim kitchen, and a small bathroom seemingly untouched since the Nixon era. Upstairs offered 3 bedrooms and another bath. 2 chambers stood vacant, echoing voids of bare floor and peeling paint. My own assigned room held a large bed with a depressingly concave mattress and a squat dresser in the corner, upon which my suitcase rested, stubbornly half-packed since day 1. The hidden ascent revealed itself on my 3rd day. Prowling the 2nd floor landing, I noted the tall bookcase, set into the wall yet subtly misaligned, as if reluctant to belong. The wood paneling behind it seemed distinct, bearing the faint outline of a careful incision. A tentative push, and the heavy shelves slid sideways with surprising ease, unveiling a narrow, almost hidden door. It resisted, wedged tight by time or disuse, then popped open with a gasp, exposing a precipitous stairway climbing into oppressive dimness. The air that spilled down was stale, heavy with generations of dust. I coughed, ascending the rickety steps into a cramped space defined by sharply slanted ceilings. My small torch beam sliced through the gloom. The attic floor was rough-hewn planking, coated in a thick shroud of grime. A solitary, age-darkened trunk occupied one corner. Nudging it open revealed only brittle, yellowed newspapers and the corpse of a broken lamp. It was near this trunk that my light first snagged on them, the bizarre symbols carved crudely into the floorboards, interlocking circles, jagged lines, shapes that defied easy geometry or interpretation. More emerged from behind curtains of cobwebs on the low walls, etched with an unnerving urgency as if by a trembling hand in failing light. Tracing the grooves with a fingertip sent a visceral unease coiling in my gut, a chill creeping up my spine like ice. Why carve such things here in this forgotten pocket of the house? The question resonated with a profound disquiet. I retreated, pulling the hidden door shut behind me. Sleep became a fraught negotiation that night. The house settled into its usual symphony of groans and settling timbers, sounds that now felt less like age and more like restless stirring. I turned, seeking oblivion on the lumpy mattress. Around midnight they came, the first deliberate footsteps from the space that shouldn't exist. Slow, methodical pacing directly overhead. The fine hairs on my arms prickled upright. Fumbling for the bedside lamp, I swung my legs out, planting my feet on the cool floorboards, listening intently. The steps seemed to describe a slow circle, then ceased abruptly. Silence rushed back in, amplifying the frantic pulse hammering in my ears. Flashlight in hand, I ventured into the hallway, positioning myself directly beneath the concealed attic door, staring upward. Stillness reigned. Just nerves, I told myself. The overactive imagination of a man alone in a strange, old house. I lingered a moment longer before retreating to the dubious sanctuary of my room. But it wasn't imagined. Night after subsequent night, the performance resumed, sometimes a dragging sound as if something heavy were being pulled across the floor. Other times, a frantic scuttling, a desperate pacing from one end of the cramped space to the other. It rarely lasted more than a few minutes, yet each instance constricted my chest, leaving me paralyzed in bed, breath held captive, waiting for the inevitable silence. Dawn would bleach the fear, rendering the house placid and empty, almost mocking my nocturnal terrors. I clung to rational explanations, drafts, vermin, but a deep certainty refuted them. This was no raccoon in the rafters. One evening, resolve hardening against the gnawing fear, I decided waiting passively was no longer an option. I retrieved an old storm lantern from the living room, its glass cloudy, and coupled it with my heavy-duty flashlight. As dusk bled into true night, I extinguished the upstairs lights, plunging the landing into shadow, and took up my vigil near the hidden entrance. Around 11, a faint, dry scraping whispered from above. My hand tightened on the lantern's handle, a tremor running through my fingers. The scraping coalesced into distinct rhythmic footsteps. Taking a steadying breath, I pulled the bookcase aside, wrenched open the narrow door, and began the slow ascent, my gaze probing the Stygian corners above. The flashlight beam carved an arc through the thick air, illuminating swirling dust motes, but no source of the sound. The symbols etched into the wood seemed starker, darker, as if the grooves had somehow deepened. I swept the light across the low walls. Nothing. Yet the sensation of being watched was immense, the air itself seeming to press in, heavy and expectant. My breathing grew shallow, a weakness spreading through my arms. Setting the lantern on the floorboards near the top step, its glow casting long, dancing shadows, I scanned again. Stillness, then a sharp, distinct tap directly behind me. I spun, flashlight beam wobbling violently, nearly losing my grip. A fleeting flicker, a disturbance in the shadows near the far corner, vanished as my light hit it. A cold knot formed in my stomach. Who's there? The question emerged as a ragged croak. Silence answered, profound and absolute. The tapping ceased. My heart thundered, a painful roar in my ears. Sweat beaded on my forehead as I stood rooted for another long minute, straining to perceive anything beyond the oppressive quiet. Finally, convincing myself I was alone, I backed down the stairs, step by careful step, refusing to turn away from the darkness above until the door was closed. The bookcase slid firmly back into place. In my room, I locked the door, a futile gesture I knew, and spent the remainder of the night wide awake, listening. Morning brought a desperate attempt at normalcy. I attacked the kitchen grime, dusted the mournful living room furniture, the radio burbling inanely in the background, a flimsy shield against the house's subtle creaks. Mid-afternoon, seeking fresh air, I wrestled open the upstairs windows. From there, I could see the roofline above the hidden space. It appeared sound, no obvious points of entry for any animal large enough to make such sounds. Later, I found myself standing in the hallway again, contemplating the bookcase, the secret it guarded. A powerful urge rose in me to fetch tools, to seal that portal permanently. Yet, a countercurrent of fear held me back. What if trapping it, whatever it was, only made things worse? I left it, forcing the unease down. That evening, I sifted through a stack of brittle magazines found in the living room, hoping for some clue. Snippets of local lore surfaced, tales of long-established families and their ancestral homes, but nothing resonated. Nothing illuminated the shadows in my inherited house. Resigned, I doused the lights around 10 and trudged upstairs. The familiar apprehension settled over me, heavier tonight, but exhaustion warred with fear. In bed, I left the lamp burning, its small pool of light a meager defense against the encroaching dark, and stared at the ceiling until my eyelids grew heavy. A loud, definitive thud from overhead ripped me from the edge of sleep. My heart slammed against my sternum, reaching blindly for the lamp switch. My hand knocked over the glass of water on the nightstand. A muttered curse escaped me as water slicked the floorboards. Eyes wide, breath caught, I stared upward, waiting. The footsteps began anew. Heavier this time, imbued with a dreadful insistence, each tread resonating not just in the ceiling but deep within my gut. I squeezed my eyes shut, fighting for control, for steady breaths. The thought of ascending those stairs again, alone in the dead of night, was repellent. Yet the alternative, lying here, listening, waiting, felt equally unbearable. Flashlight retrieved once more, I moved into the hallway. My legs felt leaden, encased in ice, a cold sweat prickling my neck. Bookshelf aside, door open, light stabbing upward into the maw. The climb felt longer this time, each step a conscious act of will. My mouth was desert dry, pulse a frantic tattoo against my eardrums. Reaching the top, I swept the beam across the attic floor. Dust motes eddied in the light. Everything appeared unchanged, save for the symbols. They seemed sharper, more pronounced. The lines gouged raw and fresh as if newly carved. A tightness seized my throat. I edged forward, the floor groaning beneath my weight. In the far corner, my light snagged on a shape, hunched, vaguely human. My heart leaped, lodging itself somewhere near my Adam's apple. I froze, blinking, trying to resolve the form. Then recognition dawned with a wave of weak relief. An old coat draped over the trunk, unnoticed before. I exhaled, a shaky, protracted breath. The flashlight beam continued its patrol across the walls. Nothing. No one. Yet the wrongness was palpable. A static charge in the air, raising every hair on my skin. An invisible weight pressed down. Suddenly, a scraping sound. Immediate, intimate, right behind me. I whirled. The flashlight flickered erratically for a second, and in that instant of near darkness, I heard it. The definitive slam of the attic door below. Panic surged, hot and suffocating. I lunged for the stairs, convinced someone had trapped me, but the door was merely stuck fast. A desperate yank, and it flew open. I stumbled down the steps, nearly falling, heart hammering against my ribs. Slamming the door shut, I shoved the heavy bookcase back with trembling arms and fled to my bedroom, the flashlight quivering uncontrollably in my grasp. The following day was spent on the telephone seeking mundane explanations. I reached a local handyman fabricating a story about persistent animal noises in the attic. He arrived that afternoon, a taciturn man who dutifully checked the roof, the eaves, the small ventilation grills. He found nothing, no droppings, no nests, no breaches. When I hesitantly mentioned the hidden attic, he merely shrugged, muttering about old houses and rotting wood, offering no cause for specific sounds. He didn't comment on the symbols, and a knot of inexplicable fear prevented me from pointing them out. I paid him, thanked him. He departed with a faintly troubled look, perhaps unsettled more by my strained questions than by the house itself. As dusk gathered, I prowled the exterior again, flashlight beam interrogating every wall, every window. All seemed secure. The tiny attic vents near the roof peak were intact. The surrounding woods stood silent and watchful under the rising moon. The property felt utterly deserted, save for my own intrusive presence. Back inside, I methodically locked every door, every window, a ritual against the encroaching dread. Standing in the upstairs hallway, my gaze was drawn irresistibly to the bookcase. Part of me screamed to pry it away, to nail that hidden door shut with finality. Yet another part, insidious and persistent, remained morbidly curious about those symbols, their purpose, their creator. Night fell like a shroud. I retreated to the bedroom, the familiar thrum of anxiety starting low in my stomach. The bedside lamp flickered on, a small defiance. Around midnight, the faint creak of stressed timber signaled the beginning. I sat bolt upright, watched the weak light play on the walls. Then the steps commenced. Light at first, hesitant, almost like tiptoeing. My stomach clenched. Flashlight clutched tight. I listened. A pause. Then they resumed, slower now, heavier. Each fall deliberate and weighted. Rising, I moved to the hallway, compelled to stare at the bookcase, and saw it. A thin, impossible line of faint light framing the hidden door. Impossible because I'd left no light burning in the attic. Yet there it was, a spectral glow. I swallowed against a suddenly dry throat, my palms slick with sweat. I took a single step forward, then halted, instinct screaming retreat. As I watched, the glow winked out. The footsteps ceased. And then unbelievably, I thought I heard the soft, rhythmic sound of breathing from just behind the wood. Or perhaps it was only the blood roaring in my own ears. My entire body was rigid, strung tight as wire. Taking a ragged breath, I backed away, retreated to my room, shut the door, and leaned my forehead against the cool wood, the frantic thudding of my own heart the only sound in the world. Whatever resided in that attic, I realized with chilling certainty, was aware of me, and it did not want me there. The thought sent a wave of prickling cold across my scalp. Escape, the imperative, was clear. Morning saw me tossing clothes haphazardly into the suitcase, loading the car with frantic haste, and driving towards the nearest town. I found a nondescript motel, the room sterile and anonymous. The day passed in a haze of restless pacing, lukewarm coffee, and vacant stares at patterned wallpaper. But the house refused to release its grip. My thoughts circled back relentlessly. The oppressive air, the deepening symbols, the steady nocturnal tread overhead. I felt an irrational pull, a need to understand, to confront. An attempt to call an acquaintance with a penchant for historical oddities went unanswered, deepening my sense of isolation. By nightfall, the sterile quiet of the motel room was unbearable. My hands trembled intermittently. Sleep was an impossibility. Against all reason, against the visceral fear clawing at my insides, I knew I had to go back. The house waited under the cold wash of moonlight, shadows stretching like grasping fingers from the porch. Inside, the flashlight beam cut through the familiar stillness of the living room. Upstairs, the landing smelled unchanged, dust and age. The bookcase stood sentinel, but behind it, the hidden door was visibly ajar, a sliver of darkness perhaps an inch or two wide. My heart leaped. I knew I had closed it securely. Placing a hesitant hand on the bookcase, I slid it aside. The door hung open, a silent, unnerving invitation. My throat constricted. Logic screamed to turn, to flee, to drive until this place was a distant nightmare. But the need for answers, however terrifying, held me rooted. With the flashlight beam trembling in my unsteady hand, I pushed the attic door fully open and aimed the light up the narrow stairs. Each step groaned under my weight as I ascended slowly, breathing shallowly through my mouth against the stale, cloying air. My pulse hammered a frantic rhythm. At the top, I swept the light around. Darkness pressed in from all sides. The symbols seemed to writhe on the walls and floor, gouged deeper still, surrounded by tiny, fresh splinters of wood, as if the unseen carver had been at work mere moments ago. A crushing weight settled on my chest. Though the space was empty to the eye, the feeling of presence was overwhelming, intimate, as if someone stood breathing cold air onto the back of my neck. A distinct footstep sounded behind me. I spun, light slashing towards the stairwell, empty. My breath came in ragged gasps, nerves shredded raw. Keeping the flashlight aimed forward, my gaze fell upon yet more carvings on the floor near the trunk. As my hand inadvertently brushed the cold wood of the trunk itself, I flinched back. For a fleeting, sickening instant, I could have sworn the symbols pulsed, catching the light in an unnatural way. My head felt light, dizzy. Forcing myself into motion, I backed towards the stairs, step by agonizing step, never turning my back on the suffocating darkness. Reaching the door, I slammed it shut, the sound echoing unnaturally loud, and shoved the bookcase violently back into place, my hands shaking uncontrollably. A mad scramble back to the bedroom, grabbing keys and suitcase without thought for lights or locked doors. Down the stairs, fumbling with the front door lock, then out into the cool night air. My heart hammered against my ribs as I threw myself into the car, engine roaring to life. Glancing compulsively at the upstairs windows, I half expected to see a figure silhouetted against the glass, but there was only darkness. What resided in that house I cannot say with certainty. I only know that its presence felt ancient and malevolent, and its focus was squarely on me. Each night the footsteps grew bolder, the symbols angrier. Whether it was a disturbed spirit, some entity bound to the place, or merely the elaborate, cruel trick of a hidden human tormentor, I could not endure it. As I drove away, tires spitting gravel, a palpable pressure lifted from my chest, the feeling of escaping not just a place, but a predator. I never sought that inheritance, that decaying house saturated with secrets. I have no intention of ever returning. Let the house keep its shadowed attic, its cryptic markings, its relentless nocturnal pacing. I will not be the one to disturb its slumber again. The thumb, a pale hook snagged from the encroaching dark, was a signal I should have ignored. A warning flare against the velvet drape of night. But solitude gnaws and weariness dulls the edge of caution, a perilous alchemy on a ribbon of asphalt that seemed to spool endlessly toward oblivion. My rig sighed, air brakes hissing as the headlights pinned a silhouette that would later etch itself onto the back of my eyelids. My handle is Silas. 19 years wrestling these metal beasts down endless highways, hauling freight from dawn till the graveyard shift. Thought I'd seen the spectrum of strange the road offers up. Nothing readied me for that night, somewhere deep in the fractured spine of the old highway. 14 hours straight, chasing a dispatcher's deadline. The radio, long surrendered to a blizzard of static, was dead company. My thermos echoed hollow, much like the pit of my stomach. The hypnotic pulse of the road was starting to warp reality, the painted lines shimmying like heat haze. Then him, a solitary shape beside the thirsty scrub, thumb angled skyward. In the fleeting instant framed by my side mirror as I rolled past, our eyes locked. A jolt went through me, something primal recoiling from that gaze. Yet exhaustion, heavy as my payload, pressed down on reason. I feathered the brakes, the 18-wheeler groaning its reluctance as momentum bled away. Through the looking glass, I tracked his approach. He moved with a peculiar, disjointed rhythm, a marionette whose puppeteer had nodded off. Closer now, details sharpened under the spill of the cab lights. Tall, skeletal beneath a jacket too thin for even this mild night. Frayed at the cuffs. His face was a topography of sharp angles and deep-sunk shadows. "Destination!" I hollered, my voice rough as he reached the passenger side. His reply scraped out like stones grinding together. "Same as yours." Every nerve ending fizzed, screaming, "Drive, now," but a vestige of some misplaced road etiquette, or maybe just profound fatigue, made me lean across the expanse of the cab and thumb the lock. He folded himself inside, the same jerky, ill-fitting movements. An odor accompanied him. Damp soil, loamy and rich, underscored by a faint coppery tang I couldn't quite decipher. I held my breath as I eased the clutch, pulling the rig back onto the Blacktop River. "Silas," I offered, mostly to puncture the silence that had instantly ballooned between us, thick and uncomfortable. He swiveled those unsettling eyes toward me, a pause stretched, taut as wire. "Abel," he finally offered. "Abel Jones, perhaps, and I'm the king of Siam," I let it lie. Unspoken rule of the road. Stranger in the cab, questions kept leashed. We rolled on, the quiet punctuated only by the deep thrum of the diesel engine and the sporadic thwack of insects, immolating themselves against the windshield. I risked glances. Something about him felt fundamentally wrong. His stillness wasn't relaxed. It was the stillness of something poorly assembled, not yet settled into its borrowed skin. "So, Abel, where you coming from?" The silence was a physical weight I couldn't bear. He didn't respond right away. When he did, his voice had drifted, acquiring a distant, almost resonant quality. "A place where the light never fades and the pathways are cobbled with bone." A nervous chuckle escaped me. Sounds like Reno after a bad weekend. No answering smile, just that hollow, unwavering stare. "You cannot imagine," he breathed. The vast cab suddenly felt claustrophobic, the air unnaturally chill. I nudged the heater up, a futile gesture. Abel had turned his gaze outward again, watching the darkness blur past the window. Mile by monotonous mile, the unease within me metastasized. His presence seemed to leach the warmth, the very familiarity from the night. The highway, my constant companion, felt alien, hostile, its edges dissolving into deeper, more menacing shadows, just beyond the reach of my beams. I was forming the words to suggest the next truck stop, a brightly lit island in this ocean of dark, when Abel spoke again, his voice soft, insidious. "Do you entertain notions of monsters, Silas?" The question landed like ice down my spine. "Can't say that I do," I managed, aiming for casual, hearing the tremor betray me. Those vacant eyes fixed on me once more. "You will." My knuckles whitened on the wheel. "Look, friend, I don't know what game you're playing, but The sentence died unborn, because in that instant, Abel shifted. It began subtly, a subcutaneous ripple beneath his skin, like water flowing under thin ice. Then his face seemed to lose its fixity, features blurring, melting, reshaping into contours that were starkly, terrifyingly inhuman. I watched, paralyzed as his fingers stretched, joints cracking, elongating into talons that ripped through the worn fabric of his gloves. Instinct screamed louder than thought. I stomped the brakes. The rig slewed violently, tires shrieking protest as we lurched to a halt, straddling the center line. My hand scrabbled desperately for the door latch, but Abel, the thing wearing Abel's shape, was quicker. A clawed hand, impossibly strong, clamped onto my forearm. Pain flared sharp and hot, mingling with a surge of pure terror. I cried out, twisting, fighting the crushing grip. "Leaving so soon, Silas?" the creature rasped, Abel's gravelly voice distorted into a hellish parody. "The spectacle has barely commenced." Blindly, I swung my free fist, connecting with something that yielded like cold, damp clay. A howl tore through the cab. a sound that vibrated in my bones, ancient and predatory. The grip faltered just enough. I tore my arm free, shoving the door open and tumbling out, hitting the asphalt with bruising force. Agony lanced through my shoulder, but adrenaline surged, a chemical fire propelling me upright. I ran, didn't look back, couldn't. The shriek of tortured metal split the night, followed by a guttural roar that wasn't animal, wasn't human, was something dredged from nightmare. Against all reason, I risked a glance over my shoulder. The sight almost stopped my heart, froze the blood in my veins. The thing had burst through the cab's roof as if it were foil. It loomed over my truck, a grotesque silhouette against the faint starlight, a chaotic fusion of scales and hide, its face a distorted mask of needle-sharp fangs framing eyes that burned with malevolent internal light. I ran harder than I knew I could, lungs searing, legs pumping pistons, but I heard it behind me, the heavy, rhythmic thud of its pursuit, shaking the very road beneath my feet. It was playing, I realized with dawning horror, a predator savoring the chase. Just as my legs threatened to buckle, light bloomed ahead, the fluorescent oasis of a gas station. Hope, fragile but fierce, surged. I pushed, pleaded with my failing body to reach that sanctuary. Suddenly, the sounds of pursuit ceased. I risked another backward glance. The creature was receding, folding back into a semblance of human form as it melted into the roadside shadows. I staggered into the pool of light surrounding the gas pumps, breath tearing through my throat in ragged gasps. Inside, the attendant glanced up from a dog-eared magazine, his eyes widening at my state. "Hey buddy, you all right?" he asked, hand already reaching for the phone beneath the counter. Words failed me. I shook my head, collapsing onto the cracked, cool linoleum, the cheap fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. As the attendant spoke urgently into the receiver, I stared out at the highway, half expecting to see those twin embers glowing from the darkness, watching. The state troopers arrived, their flashing lights painting the scene in strobes of red and blue. They found the rig abandoned down the road, the cab ripped open like a tin can. No sign of Abel or the thing he had become. My story met with polite skepticism, of course. Fatigue, dehydration, maybe bad road food triggering hallucinations, the usual dismissals. But the deep, precise gouges on my arm, the inhumanly large prints pressed into the soft shoulder near the truck, those they couldn't easily explain away. I hung up my keys after that night. The thought of climbing back into a cab, of facing those long, solitary stretches of darkness, impossible. Some nights, sleep offers no refuge. I jerk awake, cold sweat plastering my hair, the memory of those burning eyes and that twisted voice vivid as the present moment. What Abel was, where it came from, I'll never know. But I know this: the dark holds teeth, harbors things that defy tidy explanation, and sometimes they need a lift. So if you find yourself on a lonely road late at night and a solitary figure signals from the shoulder, keep your foot down. Trust the hum of your engine over the whisper of pity, because you never truly know who or what you might be inviting across your threshold. Me, I stick to daylight now, and I'll walk before I ever offer a stranger a ride again. Some journeys carry too high a toll.